And so it is our great pleasure and honor to be in dialogue with two amazing women. And I'm going to introduce myself and the context here briefly and invite us into a brief grounding exercise. And then we'll dive into the dialogue. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you again for being here. And we are in dialogue today, and we'll have a couple of breakouts. And during the breakouts, and really throughout the conversation, we just invite you to be respectful of everyone who's here and respectful in the comments you make in the chat and to one another in the breakout sessions. And this is the second dialogue in our second series of Women in Systems Thinking. And my name is Carrie Norton, and I'm here joined by my two colleagues, Carolina Carvalho and Felicia Chavez. We form the System of Systems Thinkers. And last year, we began the dialogue series to honor the 50th anniversary of Limits to Growth, which was authored by multiple people, but the lead author of that tome was Danella Meadows. And many of you know of her work, and her work is archived and housed at the Academy for Systems Change. So we invite you to explore her work further. But last year was a big year for her work, and this year continues to be a big year for her work, I believe, because people are rediscovering her work and the important contributions she made to the field of systems thinking, and arguably as the godmother of modern systems thinking. And so we honor her memory, and we want to continue to promote the ideas through her work, but also through the lens of other important women in the field. And that's the purpose of these series that we have crafted for your participation. And today we're going to be diving into the question of how is systems thinking more approachable? What are the foundations of systems thinking, and how can we make it more accessible and broadly socialized and easier for people to find pathways into? And so I'm just thrilled to be in conversation with my colleagues, Linda and Soma, who I invite you to review their bios on our website, which Carolina can post in the chat. They have extensive experience and contributions in the field. I consider both of them teachers of mine. And Linda was introduced to me as during my fellowship with the Academy for Systems Change. And so Shoma's work I've come across in my own work in well-being, and they both have extensive contributions to the field and portfolios of work that I really encourage you to explore after this conversation. So I want to just take a moment as we enter here today to ground ourselves in the purpose of the dialogue, which is to remember. And so I'd like to invite all of us to close our eyes and just take a moment to consider and remember, if we can, how we came across the notions of systems thinking, the field of systems thinking, the ideas contained within the field of systems thinking. When was the moment that you first discovered systems thinking, and how did it make you feel? What does it mean for you, and how does it serve you? And so as we walk through this dialogue today, I invite you to just keep that in your heart and in your mind. What does it mean for all of us, and how can it help us as we move through this great transition? And so I invite you now to come back into the room, and I'd like to hand it over to the wonderful Linda Booth Sweeney and the wonderful Somava Saha to be in dialogue for the next really almost 90 minutes. We'll make time for Q&A and some sharing and some breakouts, as I said. But let's begin our dialogue by exploring are what are the challenges to systems thinking? What inhibits us from fully embodying and embracing systems thinking as a culture and a civilization? Linda and Shoma, take it away.
What do you think, Shoma? Do you want to go first or me?
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. Well, I just have to pause one more time to, first of all, say thank you so much for that beautiful, gentle grounding. Carrie, I really appreciate that. And the remembering is so important. And also to Felicia and Carolina for holding this conversation and nurturing it to the point where we are here today. Um, I also wanted to pause just because I'm very much aware of the land that I'm on and how that's influencing me as a systems thinker. And I think that'll come out throughout this time together. But I'm in Massachusetts outside of Boston, and I'm on the lands of the Pawtucket, Algonquins, and Neshoba tribes, the traditional lands here, and learning more and more as I explore and ask. So just want to be acknowledge that. So to your question, what inhibits systems thinking? Um, I for me, it comes down to just a few things, um, like the way we talk, the way we think, our artifacts, our schooling, our media. Um, so, and then of course, I would say that there are definitely exceptions to those things. But I could just give a few examples. If When I think about even just schooling, traditionally has been compartmentalized. I don't know about all of you, but I went through school in this way. Math, the bell rings. English, the bell rings. Science, the bell rings. Maybe a social studies, as if the world was fragmented in that way. And actually, when you think about something that's systems, it crosses over compartments. It crosses over those different. So something like climate is has to do with history. It has to do with geography. It has to do with science. The way that we have separated knowledge. Typically, the natural world over here, social world over here, maybe science separate. It does not encourage systems thinking. So that's one. I would also say, even think about our artifacts that we kind of move around in our everyday lives with, even a hospital. So, the heart over there, the, appendages are over there, lungs are over here, so we are constantly in a almost like fighting gravity to try to reorient ourselves to this sense of interconnected wholes. Our media, for the most part, you don't really typically see the systemic media. You see, we talk about events. We don't talk about changing behavior over time, right? We're pushed to just react to the latest big small bite of news. So you do have to look at other resources, news outlets for that kind of thing. But again, another kind of reinforcing feature that I think what Zeynep Tufekci would call asystemic thinking. The reactive, short-term, compartmentalized kind of focus. Um, I would say also the way I think one of the biggest challenge that I find with some of the work that I do, I work with the Obama Foundation right now. I work with their fellows, and I'm working with some fellows at Columbia, and a lot of the challenges that they're dealing with, a lot of it has to do with the way we present complex information, the way we talk about it. So we don't necessarily have the language and the visuals to mirror that complexity. We often, you might see, we land into bullet points and lists. So I did a lot of work around childhood obesity, and for a long time, when I would encounter, what's happening with childhood obesity, what's causing, these chronic rates, you would see laundry lists. It would have to do with, the parents' weight, look, where they lived, or different just features. But it wasn't until the last maybe 4 years or so that I started to see childhood obesity represented as the interconnected dynamics that produce, or that keep chronic levels of childhood obesity in place. Then when we start to shift our visuals and to shift our language, the way we're talking about it, that actually invites, in the case of this, I worked with a group called Shape Up Somerville in Massachusetts, and it they ultimately had, in the way they were really taking on childhood obesity, they ended up inviting in the built environment, whether kids could walk to school and burn calories. So there was, actually painted sidewalks, and got, adults to be, walking school bus, leads, and the community gardens, and the school, and the parents, and the hospitals, and so all these different factors were interacting to influence rates of childhood obesity. But the way we can't use a laundry list or a bullet pointed list to talk about those interacting factors. So it's actually pretty simple. But it's, if you think about our schooling, and I'll wrap up here because there's so many things, Shoma, that I could be listing that are the inhibitors. But if you think, and I don't want to be like coming down on school, because I think school is, there's a lot of pressures on school. I just think that typically we haven't learned to represent the reality of the complexity and the interrelationships that we're in. So I think that's, and it's by the way, it's low hanging fruit. It's actually something that we really can. And I'm going to potentially show later, if we have a few minutes, how even at 5 years old, there's such a nice simple progression from, something as simple as, it's called like a connection circle, to getting really more sophisticated, and what you might see like a World Economic Forum. There's, I have a fun picture where I show, like, a 5-year-old version, and then the sophisticated World Economic Forum, and you'll see that the two are really not that far off from each other. It's just that we just need to give young people an opportunity to be thinking and representing, making their thinking visible in that way. So those are a few of my inhibitors.
Linda, I love what you said about the 5-year-old and the World Economic Forum. And I also love that you started, and Carrie started with acknowledging history. So I want to acknowledge to the land of the Pennacook, and Wabanaki people that I'm on, and honor them. And also want to honor Janelle Meadows and her work. I will tell you that what's beautiful is the way in which it's gotten adopted. So right now, one of the things we're doing is at our work at Wellbeing and Equity in the World is launching a new program office to address structural racism and other structural inequities in healthcare and public health. And one of the things that the foundation, which is the largest health philanthropy in the nation, has decided to adopt is that every single new initiative has to say which part of Janella Meadows frameworks will be moved by a particular initiative, and are assessing their impact based on that. So I just want to share that, just the impact of that, and the way that's percolating in ways that are operational. And I think that at the end of the day, what we always ask is what, so what, and now what, as a way of thinking about this, as we seek to take systems thinking and democratize that for people, knowing that everybody has the right to know and understand the systems that are operating around them, that they're swimming in a way that liberates them to be active agents of change in the system. And so, Linda, our first act at well, as we formed Wellbeing and Equity in the World, coming out of the 100 Million Lives Initiative, which for those of you who don't know, it was a global initiative involving 30 countries and over 1,850 partners reaching 500 million. So we were working with lots of groups from the grassroots to the grass tops everywhere, and had been figuring out, like, how do we make systems change visible? And our first act when we formed We in the World was we were invited by a group that was working with youth experiencing homelessness. And they were graduated from the foster care system, had a benefits cliff, as many youth do, as their foster families no longer had the resources to support them. And so they became homeless if they weren't well connected. And as a result of that, in this particular group, they'd built a system to support and welcome these youth, to support them in job training and other ways. So as we sat with the youth, I began sharing a story. And I have to admit that we were doing this, a youth leadership academy for them. It was led by youth and the youth had helped craft it. And they said, but Shoma, we still need you to do this particular piece of it, which was about helping to see the system and all of the rest of the 2 days they were doing. So I started with the way I usually start, which is often, and I'll just share this with you because it may be helpful just to imagine. So imagine a room, you have youth who have been bused in the first day that we had focused on transforming from within, transforming together. And this was transforming outcomes, policies, and systems. And I started talking about what it looks like when these two kids who might be born in the same hospital and grow up just 2 miles apart and have a 25-year difference in their life expectancy, what that looks like for them. And there was this moment where I realized, as I was telling my usual story of these two kids who had gotten their dads to take them to the barber shop to get their head shaved, because I often find that's a really useful thing to be able to say, see, for these two kids, racism is clearly an acquired disease. And yet, if I can predict at birth that they'll grow up 2 miles apart with a 25-year difference in their life expectancy, that's evidence of a system. And here's what it looks like to look at economic hardship and childhood obesity and what those maps look like 20 or 30 years later that leads to premature death and the outcome of that. And here's the structural factors that are underlying each of these places that make them at risk. I remember choking up because I realized these were the kids who were losing 20 years of life expectancy. They weren't theoretical, they were these kids. And I remember thinking, what am I saying? What am I doing? What does this mean? But for the kids, it was so liberating because for them, suddenly they had a vocabulary and a way of knowing that it wasn't their fault or even their foster parents' fault or et cetera, that they were in a system that wasn't working, that wasn't set up to create the conditions for them to thrive. And that knowledge of the system, along with tools and strategies like driver diagrams, super simple tools to change the system, were what they needed to feel that sense of agency and hope. They rated in the end that system, which I was afraid for that moment as would be damaging to them. They said it was the highest and the best thing that they had seen, and that was what they needed. That invitation to be changers of the system was what they needed to transform their pain into propane to actually create change. And I share that with you because I am a certified geek. I love real system dynamic models. I mean, this is an example of a model of our wind theory of change. And I love every little bit of it and all the interactions and how do we model what. But as we go to democratize this, what we remember in our work at We in the World is that the importance of understanding these models and who owns them and who understands them are not about us. We power what other people know and what we believe, but this is a belief system of how we change the world. Our ability to transform that into something that that anybody can understand, that there are legacies for living together, that some of dignity and inclusion, others of trauma and exclusion. They either lead to people having more likelihood of having all the things they need to thrive, like those vital conditions, or exist in adversity, and whole systems like economic systems have built on the assumption of adversity, and the ability to say then the not the to the what, but the now what became much of the time what we're doing is responding. We are taking people out of poverty to what we sometimes do is work to build those conditions and communities that everybody needs. We're building then the capacity for resilience, including, for example, giving these youth the chance to know that they can do something. But that if we're serious about it, what we need to do is get into relationships with one another that are trustworthy and equitable, find a way to understand that when we norm and exclude others, we lose something. All of us loses. And that we need to reclaim that knowledge of what was lost, just as Linda began to do as we reclaimed the native people who lived on this land. And that collectively together we may have what we need to chart a path toward long-term renewal. That's been the work. And what's been powerful is to find methods like stories to system change that help people take complex things using things that are not as mathy, which people don't, to begin to construct what they see the system is, where the assets are, to decode and understand, and out of that build storytelling and story catching campaigns that collect and tell the story of people's lives and preserve cultural memory and give people a way of understanding how to change the system. This is from Keep Black Love Alive, a campaign that across the rural South kept tens of thousands of people alive, in a way that gave people a way for storytelling and system change together. And then out of that created strategy maps to, for example, interrupt the cycle of generational poverty.
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. Well, I feel like this is material, Shoma, that we all could spend a lot more time with. I'm sorry we don't have more time, but it's great to see how you're thinking. And what I'd like to do is to invite us now to enter into our first breakout. And I invite the participants to explore together what you see as the barriers to system change. Where have you found obstacles in incorporating and embodying these ideas into your work and life? And where have you struggled? And what challenges might you see in the larger system? So we're going to invite you into an 8-minute breakout, and we just invite you to explore that question as deeply as you have time for in 8 minutes. And then we'll come back to transition into the second part of our conversation from the breakout. So Carolina, any questions from anyone? Okay.
Looks like we are ready to
Enjoy
go.
your conversations. Welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed your conversations and your explorations. And I certainly invite any of you who'd like to share in the text chat any discoveries or revelations that you shared in your breakouts. Feel free to type those up in the chat, and so that others might see you. So welcome back to our dialogue participants, Linda and Soma, and we are going to transition now to a hopeful part of the conversation as we explore the question of what actually fosters systems thinking and how might we lay the foundation for lifelong systems thinking? How do we make this a way of life, a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of moving through the world? So I invite you, Linda and Shoma, to dive on in.
Okay, I'll go. All right. Well, this is a sweet spot for me. This is something that I think about pretty much every day. And so how can we foster? How can we encourage? And I really work with people 4 to 80, not 84. I haven't worked with 84-year-olds yet, but pretty much the lifespan so I do so what I want to, I guess what I want to share um, is something that can I feel like can be used at a very young age and at whatever age the adults you're working with. Almost, can I just get a little sense? Maybe people could put a heart or a thumbs up, or are we all engaged in working with people to, encourage systems thinking in some way? Are you trying to do that? Somewhat. Okay, many of us. Okay, great. So I just want to make sure this is relevant. But okay, so as a doctoral student, great, long time ago, before my 3 kids, I looked at how I was really curious. Well, let me just go back real quick. I used to work for Outward Bound. Outward Bound is an outdoor experiential organization, and um, I had learned about systems thinking while on, believe it or not, in the wilderness, because I was experiencing systems. And then I got a copy of Peter Sengi's book, The Fifth Discipline, and I realized, oh, that's what I have to do. Like, I was living it, and then I wanted to kind of make it so that I could bring those ideas out and encourage other people. So I ended up going back to get my doctorate in education. And while there, I did my dissertation on, I looked at children's 10-year-olds and adults, natural conceptions, intuitive, how they actually thought about everyday systems like predator and prey, like wolves and rabbits, or, a busy city, or, interaction with, siblings. And what I found was something that was pretty simple, that both children and adults, without scaffolding, without encouragement, they often fell into what you might call linear thinking. A causes B, end of story. Okay, so just think of a straight line. So if we were talking about wolves and rabbits, wolves eat the rabbits, end of story, period. And so maybe, I won't go into the numbers that came out, but let's say a third of that would be, doesn't matter. There was a certain percentage but a significant percentage that was their response. And we know that in wilderness, as wolves eat the rabbits, if there's less rabbits over time, that influences the wolf population, right? Because they have less food source, so the wolf population could go down over time. And as the wolf population goes down over time, the rabbit population could increase. So that kind of up and down behavior. And interestingly enough, many of the adults did the same thing. And that is something called proximate cause, where we kind of focus on what's immediate, cause and effect. And again, often in school, we're not taught about cause and effect that's cyclical, that's circular, that feeds back on itself, which is a feature of systems. Okay. So one of the things that I found was that if you do simple scaffolding or prompts, really simple questions like, what would happen next? What could happen next? Then people could start to go beyond that, A causes B, to look at other impacts and start to go back to the fact that if something of a rabbit population decreases, it could actually influence the wolf population. So what that is what honestly shows up in all of my work now, is the simple prompts, the simple encouragements to go beyond what's immediate, to go beyond what's where the action is what we typically do, and to look beyond, to look at, what are the other impacts, what would happen if this connected to that, into that's how systems thinking really starts. So I would say when the hopeful end of things is that incorporating into your coaching, incorporating into the way that you speak to children or adults, is to get them to start building that muscle, to think about not, and first of all, to recognize that we all fall into um, linear sentences. That's the way our sentence structure is organized. But systems asks us to look beyond that very straight line to, if you think, for example, about typical traffic congestion in a city, and look at any newspaper that reports about that, in that traffic congestion situation, you'll often see, well, let's build another highway. Makes sense, right? There's a problem. I've got too much traffic. Well, when you start to look beyond traffic congestion to build a highway, what happens? That's where you have to ask, what could happen next? And when you build a highway, what in the short term, it might reduce the traffic congestion, but over time, what could happen next? Well, the outlying areas become more attractive, right? Because there's less congestion. So then we move to the outlying areas. So then there's more commuters. And guess what? More commuters means more traffic congestion over time. But but it's our position, I think, as systems change leaders, systems thinkers, parents, in any position that we are in, to take that simple prompt to move beyond, again, A causes B, if that makes sense. It's so simple. And I could show you, can I show you a quick example of this, like in a classroom, just around kindness? Let me just show you this super quick, and then I'll share my screen. I think I have it right here. All right. See if I can just do this. Can you see it? Maybe Carrie, you can tell me if you can see it.
And
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So this is I think one of the things we talked about in this whole session was I was going to give you a sneak peek into a new children's book that I have coming out, but so it's an opportunity to try these kind of conversations. So this is the book. It's called Apart Together, and speaking of Danella, it's so interesting. It's dedicated to her because I think it would make her smile. I really do. It's inspired by this idea of what happens when we need to look at things in parts, of course, right? But what happens when we really shift our focus to how the interconnections produce something greater? And so much dominance in our world for the left brain, which is the reductionist, the analytical, that we privilege that. And I could, to the point, anyway, there's so much I could say about that. But I feel like that we need to throw our weight into the other side, the synthesis, the integration, the systems. We need both sides. We don't need just one or the other. Okay. So anyway, so this book looks at what something's apart, and then how it changes when it's together. So it could be soccer, it could be, making honey, it could be mixing paint. Any everyday situations, washing your hands in health is another one, a home is another example. And this comes out in just a couple of weeks. So you can always get it. But and I will share, I create a little guide to go with it that's free for anybody who wants to actually use it and use it with children, to encourage this idea of, going beyond linear thinking. But I'll just show you. So the 3 questions that I think especially for little kids, but I think this could be used with adults too, is notice. What do you see? What's happening? And that's where it's okay to say, there's a seed, there's water, there's the sun. And, that's the same thing, that noticing, and Soma will speak to this, I'm sure, but that you want, what are you actually experiencing, right? No judgment, say it however you want to say it. And then wonder, because here's the whole thing with systems thinking is that we can't see how the parts are connected. There's no lines drawn. We all, no matter if you're 5 or 55, you have to imagine the connections. And so and but I literally work with people who are 40 and 50 who haven't grown up encouraged to imagine the connections. That part has just sort of been dormant, and if they, can you imagine if young kids are, that's a natural way that they think, even if they can't see it, they wonder, how is this connected to that? So that second question is what if, which is also a great question for growth mindset. You want that what if kind of question, not just what is that. So what is this? I mean, what if this is connected to that? And the third is what changes, or what do you think caused the change? And that's where you start to get into all different types of, causality. Some of it has to do with systems. So anyway, there's this like curious about connections framework that and it's a free little guide that I just want to show you. And then here's a simple way that you could do it with, you're talking about, it could be siblings, or it could be like kindness in a classroom, is think first about, if you're just saying, like, what are the parts of kindness? And maybe their children might say, kids, or kind words, or a sunny day. Like, I don't know what a kid would say, right? But then, and maybe you put them on little pieces of paper or a little drawing or something. And then you can ask, well, what if those parts connected? How could they connect to produce more kindness? So they might say, nice words create nice feelings. And then you say, well, let's keep going. Like, what if you have nice feelings create friends, and friends have other nice feelings about you, and other nice feelings create more friendships, and more friendships create more nice, so you could see how you could start to talk about not just the parts of kindness, but how they interrelate to produce something greater, in this case, good feelings and kindness and more friends. So anyway, that is a simple, this is, you don't need to see all this, but so I just wanted to break it down into something super simple, but no matter what you're talking about, either as adults or as kids, I think it's, go to town with the parts. It's okay to like name those parts, and then it's starting to look at how the interconnections produce the greater.
And I love that. You know, when I think about, and I love, can you imagine a whole generation of children growing up understanding how to see the system?
Mm,
I
I do.
I know you do. When we think about what would it take for it to change, for more people to be able to think in new systems, what we know is that there are several things. One is that people's inability to know that like just that, like that there is a system in place. And so we call that sort of, and we use a lot of pop culture references because people know them, they understand them, and they can carry complex ideas. And so the Matrix, when uh has the red pill and suddenly wakes up to the fact that there's a different system in place, that's often a really useful metaphor for understanding that in fact there is a system in place. And then the second part, what happens is people feel like, oh my god, am I, like it can be overwhelming. Here are all these factors, what do they have to do? And so part of what we need to build, we find, is the motivation and the confidence that people in fact can master and know and do something different. And so, you know, things like, what does it look like for you to navigate the matrix or be like the warrior? That's like, what if, that can be what maybe is appealing to a youth or an organizer. Frankly, I found it's pretty appealing to 60, 70-year-olds too. We have people who have whole avatars that are like, I'm going to navigate the matrix. Like, here's my sword. recently there was a whole network that began that is called the Justice 3 League, which is for joy, justice, and Jedis, and they're just like, we're going to be at, they're like totally mixing pop culture references, but who cares? It's this idea of we're going to learn how to navigate. It gives people that sense that they are not powerless in the face of systems. And then the third part is then how do you learn to be a well-being and equity architect? That like, what if you could learn how to do 5 things at the same time? Like, what if it wasn't? So really building that sense of possibility of why our ability to map the systems, as well as our ability to map what assets there are, and not just the barriers, but the assets and the bright spots that have figured out how to interrupt that part, that can help us identify where the catalytic nodes are that could be shifted or where something could be changed. Suddenly it gives people that sense of hope and agency, that not only can they see the system, but they can do something with the system and can be part of creating smart, effective, efficient change, not just a piece. And then if we can, we build the actual systems modeling that shows that. And that's the kind of thing that has led systems in the south of Texas to realize what they really want to do if you're a hospital system and you care about long-term health is not to build a new community health center there. It's to invest in broadband in the Rio Grande Valley that's owned by everyone, that creates access to jobs and health and education together. So that understanding of what are the things that can lead to much greater impact in a way that feels liberating for people to know that they can be system Jedis who can be the better ancestors, building the systems that our future generations need.
Mm. Yeah. So can I ask you, Soma, just a question then? And what do you feel, what do you see in those, yours are like longer term engagements, right? What's the length do you say? Is it like a 3 or 4 day? And then can you give us a sense of like the Texas example that you just gave?
Oh, sure. I will say that our engagements are at different
Yeah.
levels. Maybe like a leadership academy, like the youth one was just 2 days. Texas was 3 years. And so we usually accompany people so that what we find is helping people see something, but then walking alongside them in a see one, do one, teach one approach, where we really build and come alongside and buttress their way of seeing the system, build their internal capacity and tools to be able to do something, and then act as a resource as they do things further. We don't assume everyone needs that. Laura Patton is an amazing system change thinker. Echo Hawk, left hand in Nebraska. Laura is in New Mexico. They could see it, see some base frameworks and tools and get it. So there are some people who I think have a natural ability to, or learned ability to see the system, understand it, and immediately know how to shift whole policies. And there are others who need the support to build. And what we do is say, what's needed as we're walking alongside. What do you need to do the thing you need to do? So that we're not just teaching people and they're like, good luck, go for it. You've never flown a plane, but hopefully it'll work out. We don't say that. But instead we walk alongside as people learn how to do that.
So with the example you just gave with, I didn't hear the first part, hawk. What was
Echo Hawk.
echo hawk? That's what I thought. I
Oh,
wasn't sure.
that's a
Okay. And so he,
key.
um, he has a natural uh, way of, and what is there some in the walking alongside him that you did and partnering, was there some new ability that he gained to be able to do that, share that insight with others so that it was when you had to move on, so that was sustained, that he could sustain that work?
So 3 months ago, I didn't know Echo Hawk's name, Linda. He is a person leading minority health initiatives in the state of Nebraska. He came along. So one of the things we do is build frameworks and tools that help people know how to change the system, to create how and make them democratize them. And so one of the things we built for the CDC was coming out of this pandemic was a very different way that public health departments could approach creating equity and trustworthy partnership with their communities, and in a way where they balance their investment from short-term things for at the individual level to more upstream work on community conditions and root causes. And we happened to have a monitoring system to see who was engaging by taking something called a compass, which helps people see where they are and where they want to go. And we were noticing him taking the compass a lot. So we reached out, and actually he reached out at the same time. It was kind of funny. And he's like, this is it. This is like everything I know, but there's like ways to break this down and help everybody in my state do it. And I have a pot of money, and I want to use this to build the capacity of everybody, every health department in the state to partner with their communities. If you look at what Go has, he has Miro boards filled with maps. He understands, he knows how to do that. But it's one thing to know up here what needs to change. It's a different thing, accompany and bring people along on a change journey in a way that's understands where they are and respects and builds a change process that feels motivating, that invites people to deepen in. And so we came alongside first just to help him explain all of what he was thinking about and the structure, and now to help support a community of practice. Somehow we got involved in the state of Colorado's. I mean, Echo Hawk is a system changer. He's a node. For us, investing in Echo Hawk's capacity and his team's capacity to shift the system means building sustained capacity in systemic change. And as he's doing that now, there are now hundreds of thousands of dollars, actually well over $1 million, going out to building local community coalitions that will also have a way of understanding and analyzing and moving the system. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
What a beautiful example. We were going to do a second breakout, but we're running wonderfully behind. So what I'd like to do is give folks a choice. We're ready to transition into a part of the dialogue that I think is really exciting, and that is exploring the question of what systemic interventions might be the most transformative in the systems that you're working with, and or that you'd like to be working with, or that you're living in. You know, whatever systems are relevant for you that you're operating in, what interventions might you be able to identify, as Soma alluded to in the earlier example, that could be, you know, the most sort of powerful nodal shifts. So I would like to ask you all, really, would we be comfortable with staying in a group to explore this question together? And that would include inviting shares from the participants, as well as any questions that you all have from the prior two prompts. Really just opening it up for the balance of this session, maybe starting with the question of the systemic transformations or systemic leverage points by way of introduction from Soma and Linda, and then opening it up to the audience to both share their thoughts and questions for the balance of the session. Does that sound, are folks comfortable with that? Okay. And our dialogue? Okay, participants. Okay, great. So maybe we start with our dialogue leads, Soma and Linda. You just talked about it, Soma, in the example of EcoHawk, but what are perhaps some other systemic interventions that you like to think about, the two of you, and then maybe we'll open it up to our audience.
So I put a link in the chat based on the breakout group I was in earlier where people were working in this school. So one of the systemic, so the way we've set ourselves up as an organization about system change is one, we build frameworks and tools like the one Echo Hawk found. We come alongside those who are creating demonstrations so that they have real system change support capacity to actually create the changes and build the designs and build their capacity to be long-term teachers of this of that. But a third is we build strategic networks. So we never assume we have the answers or most of the answers. We don't even try. We actually constantly look, and just Tia Martinez, for example, this is her prezi of the school to prison pipeline and where it is, where it comes from, how it can be interrupted. It is brilliant. And so I don't need to figure that out. I'll be meeting with a team in Woonsocket. What I need to know is build the strategic networks and the harvesting system of who's got a piece of the system figured out. And then that ability to then combine that with a support system for those who can grow to be well-being and equity architects that can have the kind of interactive, immersive experiences to learn and think, how do we shape the system without worrying too much about it? I mean, in my dream world, and probably Linda's, we would have all like ways that are democratized for people to learn system science at scale, in ways that truly teach that in a way that's accessible for everyone. And I think that's the kind of change maker support system we're looking at and envisioning. But you know, if we could even surface who's got a piece of the puzzle figured out and connect the change makers to be a community of support, like not just both emotional support, but also actual like sharing of ideas, resources. We've got this part figured out. I think that would be powerful.
I love that dream. I just want to share that the link that you posted, I don't think it's linked all quite the way. So I don't know if you could maybe repost. When I click on it, it leads me to a blank screen.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Linda, do you have any thoughts?
It works. You just have to select the whole thing, but yeah.
Yeah, but I just was hoping.
Yeah, you're right. That's good.
Yeah.
Make it work.
Do you have anything you want to contribute, Linda?
I want to hear from everyone else too, but
okay.
I want to say one thing real quick, which is just building up Soma. So Soma, there's, I don't know if everyone's seen something called the Gort cloud. Has anybody ever seen that? If you look it up, GORT. And the Gort cloud is this, meant to represent the sustainability influencers, let's say, in the whole, I think it's world. I'm not sure how big the scale is. And I feel like, the brilliance of Soma and her team and the methodology. And so to answer your question, Carrie, one of the biggest interventions would be connecting that ability to tap into that expertise and wisdom across all stewards of systems change. Something where it's not this, again, we're fragmented as systems change people ourselves, which is kind of ironic. So we want to be really tightly and deeply connected in order for us to share our wisdom and our methodologies and all that. So there's that. And yet, in one word, I'd say one of the biggest levers is education. And it's the one that we don't talk about often. So
Here. Well, I just want to say too that is that very challenge of the siloing of the field of systems thinking is indeed what brought Felicia and Carolina and myself together in our earliest conversations, and which has led us to create and draft this manifesto, wherein the irony was not lost on us that the field of systems itself is siloed and fragmented. And so I share that dream. I think we all three share that dream, and I'm sure many of us on this call do as well. So thank you both for the the rich conversation. I know that we could talk for hours, but let us indeed bring some of the other nodes in the system forward to ask questions and share what's emerging for them in this conversation today. Please raise your hand and I can call on you. Yes, Bob.
Hi, yeah. One of the things that occurred to me today as this was going on is an immense challenge that this.
Bob, do you think you could maybe come a bit closer to the microphone? Your sound is quite
Okay,
quite faint.
thank you. Right. Okay. A huge challenge to this way of thinking with profound implications, the homelessness problem. And many people are probably working on this from many different frames of reference. I don't have obviously an answer, but I would think that this makes me think that the adherents to systems thinking, the teachers and leaders about it, need to also interconnect with themselves, but in addition to ways to acquire political power. Because this situation regarding, let's say, homelessness is really dependent on as many new modes of thinking as possible. And one of those is really, I think, to acquire political power. I just have to leave that question open right now. Thank you.
That is part of it. And I encourage you to look at the work of communitysolutions.org. That's actually ended homelessness in over 20 communities and what it took as a combined set of system things to do that.
Can you put the link to that, Soma?
Did
Oh,
communities.
you're on it.
For what it's worth, it's one of these like beautiful examples of system change, because what was needed were several things. You needed to eliminate not in my backyard responses. The issue isn't money. The issue is that people rejecting having people experiencing homelessness next to them. In addition to that, you have fragmentation of the social support net and a lot of work around temporary solutions instead of long-term permanent supportive housing, permanent solutions. And so the way that they did that was they figured out how, this was over years of experimentation and real testing in the 100,000 Homes campaign. They got people, ordinary people, to walk block by block, do a by name, by face registry that with a short questionnaire of people's health needs were. They worked with Palantir and then Google to build a coordinated single entry. I have a lot of issues with Palantir as a safe or not model. Built a lot of systems in place around it, but actually connect every single provider in these cities so that every provider of homeless services, actually that everything got entered into the registry. All the temporary beds got turned into permanent supportive housing. And people got prioritized not based on case review, but based on an understanding of where their health impacts would be. And that led to, and they figured out the metric was 30-day housing, the ability to place people. If the system was operating and you couldn't get people placed, that meant that more housing had to be made available. It was where the political leaders and the civic leaders had to sign on. So this eventually became adopted by HUD and then dismantled in certain administrations recently passed.
Fascinating. I'm sorry, I had to switch headsets, so I hope I'm not too faint in my sound. But I'd like to call on Dora, who has a question or a contribution.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a chairperson for an organization called Systems Change Finland, which is completely volunteer and with people with very different backgrounds and very different interests and all the rest of it. So yeah, the fragmentation and silos are present. But what we've been discussing a lot is actually, or what's kind of coming out that we are talking a lot about change and changing things, but that's the only thing we don't actually have to do because that's happening anyways. So we should be talking more about what kind of change and what kind of how do we align, and that requires like radical honesty and radical kind of thinking in a way that it's existential. Whatever we do is about our own existence, about NGOs and development, and the good teachers, right? Good teachers want to eliminate themselves or the need for themselves, because that means that life is going on and the learning is happening, and they are not needed. And that's a crisis kind of question for organizations, companies, and everyone, that they feel they will stop existing if they don't prove that they are needed in the long term. And how that's also a problem, because a lot of organizations are competing for the same pot of money and all the rest of it. So they are not going to work together because they don't realize, of course, the system that's kind of created or got created, because nobody really created a system as such, but how things are happening. So I'm just really curious, like your views on how this whole systems change work is about, our right to exist, and everybody else's right to exist, including nature and other species, etc. Just a few comments and ponderings here.
My ponderings are fairly radical in this area. So Linda, you might want to go first.
Oh, you go. I want to hear the radical. We need radical.
Ooh. Okay. I'm going to say some things and you may or may not. So you have to understand first that I am not by nature a radical person. I grew up in a family. I am actually a joyful, grateful person. I actually was raised to be a person pleaser. So it took me a while to understand. And for me, it's actually the mapping the system that helps me understand it. So our system profits when we're able to have some groups able to accumulate a lot of wealth and power, and other groups are divided. And so what we do is we create things that say that innovation is best and valued if it's siloed, if you put your stamp on it. We make it harder for people to share resources and come together as a whole. We make it difficult for people to, literally, like if you're in a nonprofit, for example, and you give away something or you're sharing in abundance, you have to really make a proof for it, or you could lose your nonprofit status. It's called inurement. Like we build things in the system that make it difficult to accumulate. And on the other side, people profit much more when they're able to build large monopolistic systems. And I'm saying that I'm not actually even saying that from a radical place, but just a system mapping. We too are just the manifestations of a system. We feel like, oh, we're being acknowledged, but in fact, we're not able to do big things unless we come together in unprecedented collaboration that actually go against the rules of the system.
And I want to add to that. I don't think that was too crazy radical. You go be radical. But just to what you said, Dora, and what Shoma said, it is the simple act of mapping a system, and it doesn't have to be a certain tool that happens with, but I just, some people use causal loop diagram, but you can do a lot of ways. What I have found is just that act legitimizes everything on that map. And so as much as I maybe think that if we're talking about homelessness, that is not valuable, whatever that is, I have to shift my perspective if I'm really willing to engage in a systems view of what's going on. I can't leave anything outside that's central. And so that what I find is like that's where someone who comes into a systems change kind of situation comes in often as an advocate, and right there they're off balance. Right there, they can't actually legitimize what they're advocating against. They can't see the rationality of a different point of view. And so I find that it's kind of an unassuming, non-threatening thing to do, but the creating this kind of picture of reality that's interconnected and kind of trying to the best as you can explain the dynamics that are at play is such a kind of like Trojan horse way to start to get people to loosen their grip on their perspective and on the value only of their perspective.
And to begin to test what could be changed. Where are the incentives the way they are? What does it look like to get beyond the incentives that are driven by the current rules of the system, to know that there are other systems, our care for our children and our grandchildren, and future generations. So I'm being very intentional in my language. What does it mean to be a better ancestor? I think understanding that these are actually not technical solutions at the end that are needed. So being able to see the system is a technical and an adaptive act. The will to change the system is fundamentally about transformation of heart and soul and relationship. And it's possible. So it's not, in Texas, it was a CEO who had throat cancer and was looking at his legacy and realizing he wanted to leave a generational impact in this region. He wanted to know that his faith, which is where it came, his health system was founded on, would be able to live into that. And so knowing that there are other systems that create the space for joy, for collectivism, for what's good for us all, and leaning into those pathways and those assets are just as important. And knowing that it's almost never a bad person who's trying to do all of these things. We are just all in a system doing the things we do because it makes sense for us. It always makes sense if you're in it. So if you can approach it not from a place of judgment, but from a place of understanding and empathy and of what it means to create shared liberation from a system that isn't working for us anymore, then it creates the conditions for growth and possibility.
Beautiful. I know my voice is faint. I apologize, but I wonder if anyone else has something oh yes, Antoinette.
I have a question. I really love the way both of you responded to that question of the right to exist. But my request is it possible you guys can create a map for us for what you just said? Especially that radical change answer that you gave and the similarities, just so that, I don't know about anyone else, but I could meditate on that and really look at applying that not just to the scenario that Dora presented, but just if you consider that, you run into that into every system, every interaction, and just having that in a map. And I'm not a technology geek, but I'm great at reading them once I can see them. If you would at some point map that out, I would appreciate that. If this is impossible for anyone else here, I know that I can't.
Here is the link where we begin to do that along with a whole set of assets.
Your wish is granted.
Antoinette, for different sectors and groups, our work is actually about saying, just as Linda said, what does it look like to win with business? What does it look like knowing that business leaders are actually, for the most part, trying to do their best? They're trying to protect their employees. They're meeting the needs of people. So we understand that. And then we say, knowing that and knowing we're not doing what we mean to be doing, how can we do? What does it look like to do better? we can begin to have very different conversations.
So, Antoinette, I want to give you something too, which is just a teeny tiny little something that kind of, I think it opens a window onto what Shoma's bigger set of tools do. And so some of you know these kind of games. I have a book called the Systems Thinking Playbook, and it's got, and some of you don't. So that's one of the books I wrote the first volume and then co-authored the second two volumes with Dennis Meadows, former husband of Danella Meadows. Anyway, so here's something. When we get into this situation where we need to disrupt the blame game, where we need to shift the focus away from pointing fingers to what is the system at play, which is, I feel like, kind of part of your impetus. Like, can you give me something to meditate on that for that? Here's a simple activity you can do, and will take you 2 minutes. Okay. So if anybody wants to play, nobody's really looking, and if you have never done this before, do it, because the only way we really shift our behavior is if we become students of our own behavior. We have to see ourselves in action, right? So we have to kind of dive in. So just make a circle on the ceiling with your finger. There, okay? And you're gonna just look up at that circle, and a nice round circle. And you're looking up and you're drawing a circle on the ceiling. Now slowly bring your elbow down until you're looking down on that circle. Antoinette, you stopped making your circle. Let's do it again. You ready? Yeah, ready? So a nice round circle on the ceiling. And then you're just going to bend your elbow and keep making that circle until you're looking down on that circle. Good. Yeah. What way is that circle going now, Antoinette? I love this part. Wait a second. I think you might be mute. Yeah, you're mute.
When you say what way is it going down, is it
when you're looking at it this way, it was going clockwise, right? The way the clock goes. And then when you're looking down on it, which way is it going?
The opposite direction.
Exactly. So what happened? I shouldn't put you on the spot, but like
differently. I'm reversing, maybe looking at it from the solution to the problem.
Or yeah, your perspective changed, right? Yeah. And if you think about that blame, like if you look at a system, at the top of the system, it might be going like this. This is how things are. This is why this is operating like this. And at the bottom of the system, or it's not the bottom, somewhere else, it might be saying, no, it's like this. But it's the same system. It's our perspective in the system. And sometimes just something simple like that can jar people to see that they're arguing. It's like the blind man and the elephant story, right? This is how it is. No, this is how it is. And what is the act that helps people step back and see the different perspectives in the system? And I feel like sometimes we need something like that to help us see that we're so embedded in our own worldviews. And if you're going to start there, you're not going to go anywhere. So
I would also say that there are people who are acting as bad actors and are using a really good understanding of systems to do bad. So it's just knowing that that's actually not the vast majority of the time. When Big Pharma took a poorly done study to then get opioids marketed, knowing that there were going to be more deaths and saying, here's what you can do just to address the more deaths, that wasn't not knowing the system, that was acting intentionally to build a system of support. So I just want to acknowledge that there are times that people are using an understanding of the system to do harm. It's just not the vast majority of time for the vast majority of people. And knowing what you do to address that directly, and that's what's happening, all the rest of the time saying, how can we see and change the system together, helps us get there.
Thank you.
I wonder if we have time for one last comment, contribution, or question, and then we're going to move to our closing. Would anyone else like to share or pose a question for our dialogue participants? I guess everybody's in learning mode today. Okay. Well, maybe I'll turn. Oh, Dora has another contribution to make.
Sorry, yeah, just very quickly, because that seems to be something we face a lot, is the question of catch-22 of the system, right? To be able to see the system, you would need to actually stop and pay attention. But our current system is so geared towards efficiency and effective whatever you do in whatever system that it doesn't allow you to stop. So how do you yeah, so how do you get out of this situation?
I can just, I know we have just a few minutes, but I think both Shoma, and I create spaces. We work with others to create spaces to think differently so that you can see the system that you and others are in. Yeah, but you have to step off the treadmill to be able to do that in some way. You're still working within the system, but you're looking at it together. So I don't know, Shoma, what would you say?
I would say part of what the system doesn't want you to do is think too hard about it. Part of what we can do is do it anyway. You know, often we get driven by here's our to-do list that somebody else has said. But the definition of shape of actually shifting out of that, of taking that red pill and choosing to be a Jedi is not operating in that, but beginning to see, go to the balcony so you can see how the system is operating so that you can navigate much more efficiently and effectively. And if we can, that requires inner discipline. And it's hard. I too am driven by my to-do list a lot of times. But the biggest part of what we've done is put checks and balances in place in our own organization that are about what will we do and how are we acting and how do we take in space to reflect and see deeply and get in relationship. And you can make those choices.
That's a beautiful note to end on. And I just want to say thank you to our dialogue participants, Shoma and Linda. This was a really just delightful conversation, profound conversation, challenging conversation. And I've learned a lot today. And I'm just grateful to you both for your participation and taking the time to be here, and to all of you for participating. And I want to hand it over to Felicia to close us out and share more about our next dialogue. And just grateful to everyone here for your contributions and participation.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm putting a link in the chat. In particular, for anyone who's newer to systems thinking, this is the systems thinking mini course. It's about 30 minutes total, 3 different videos. In case you're looking for a bit of an entryway to some of the jargon or other resources following on from today's conversation. And I wanted to mention that toward the later part of November, we'll be sending out information in this regard. To those of you who have registered for this event today or past events, we'll be having a conversation that is in the planning stages, but the working subject is women in government in systems thinking. And so that, of course, presents its own specific set of challenges. If anybody has any references to women in government and systems thinking, people who have really gone in deep and have tried to bring systems thinking into a government setting, whether from the local level up to the international level, we'd be interested to hear from you. And I'll put my email in the chat so you can contact us about that. And then also Carolina, I think, is going to share in the chat a link to register for our what we call our interstitial, which is a conversation amongst participants to reflect on today's event and the conversations that have come before and share ideas and more resources. Thank you, Carolina, and I'll hand it back to you, Carrie.
Well, I'll just say so long, and thank you again to our Linda and to Soma for your wonderful work in the world, and to everyone for being here. And we hope to see you again soon. And we invite you to watch all the recordings of all the past dialogues on our website, and share them with friends, and come again. So have a great day.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.